slope, ours by numbers, squad, 1. Company.
Since covering the Carbonios SRB2 mod, the requests for one mod in particular have chased me wherever I've gone. In my YouTube comments, I've seen it. I've had DMs regarding the mod. My Discord server fell over itself to tell me about it. It's Sol Sestancia Part 2, which released right at the start of July. It's another Rogerroger level pack, which are always fun and pretty comedic. It's got a lot of traction right out of the gate, and, oh yeah, it's a sequel to one of the most popular mods on the SRB2 forums. So it's no surprise there's been that push for me to cover it. Only one problem. I hadn't actually played the original Sol Sestancia prior to this point, and this new mod is an actual sequel, the sort that doesn't make sense if you haven't experienced the prior entry in the series. So, we'll get to part 2 soon, don't worry. But let's get part 1 out of the way first, right? Looking back at it, I really ignore this one, seeing it's been requested dozens of times over the span of years, but let's set the record straight and get straight into it. Sol Sestancia has a lot of levels, 17 to be exact, so discuss them in groups rather than individually, as the structure of the mod by default means that they blend together to an extent. There are 3 level types, the standard levels you can expect to see in a Roger level pack, which is to say, mostly large linear hallways which you can fall into a flow state while playing, which are as good as always, intertwined with some more experimental concepts, hub worlds, which are mostly to help connect these aforementioned standard levels and to provide a little bit of, well, I guess the most correct term would be world building, and cutscenes, into like more linear versions of the hub worlds, but which generally communicate a greater level of story through one mean or another. That might be through voice lines, through controlled camera angles, or through animated sprites. But they aren't your typical cutscene. They are by all means fully functional levels you control your movement through. The first group of levels sees you actually reach the island of Sol Sestancia that the level pack takes place on, starting with a short chunk of Angel Island where you can meet some familiar faces, take on what could very charitably be described as a boss fight against Eggman, and then board the tornado to make your way to the first actual level, Egg Fleet 3.5. This is all of the hallmarks of your standard Roger level, plenty of blue springs, a ton of enemies, none of whom really pose any threat, all encased in a level where you basically hold forward and just need to react to what's in front of you in time, rather than need to explore or slowly navigate some tougher platforming. I don't really know what the general view is on this design philosophy is, as most of the discussion I see around this creator's levels is around the Easter eggs and aesthetics, but I really enjoy it. Dare I say it? I think vanilla SRB2 could do with a few of these sorts of levels, scattered amongst the more involved ones it's composed of. Finally, to reach Sol Sestancia itself, we're dropped out of the Egg Fleet into the ocean, before running to a cruise ship in the first and probably worst cutscene level in the pack. We disembark onto Sol Sestancia into Alcudia port, which is, I think, the largest hub in the game. If you just want to rush to the next Rio level, you can run through this pretty quickly to reach a hotel room, but I'd recommend exploring a little bit. The whole level pack is filled with Easter eggs and nods to various other things both inside and outside of the Sonic franchise, especially the Archie run of Sonic comics. But this is probably the most interactive they get. Running into various triggers, which can be entering or running past buildings or just sitting inside the talking character, we'll begin playing with voice lines, which range from actual snippets of lore to throwaway jokes. Plus you can find yourself the emblem radar here if you're the completionist sort. I won't tell you where though, you need to find it yourself. Not that you'll really need it, as most of the emblems are fairly easy to find and collect in this level pack. Once we reach the hotel, we can explore the ruins of the crashed Egg Fleet to try and understand their aim on the island, firstly by completing a fairly ordinary level before finding out their plot in another cutscene level. We go on to searching for emerald shards in base camp, though this really isn't like the stages found in the Adventure series. In reality, it's just another linear level. You just need to formalize your progress by collecting the shards that you really aren't able to miss. Finishing base camp gets us to Santa d'Or, which blends the line between hub and cutscene level. It's really not as interesting as Alcudia Port if you try to go off the main road, even though you can't go as far, with fewer interactions you can have. Plus, there's more animations and plot progression here than most of the cutscenes. But the level title doesn't specify to a cutscene like the rest of those levels do, and therefore I can't accept it being one. The level ends with you going back to school, before the next one expands that into you escaping the campus as the entire island falls under Eggman control. The first time I played through this stage, I didn't really have much of a problem, but the playthrough I recorded was one where I really struggled with the trampoline mechanic it introduces. There are two types, with orange being strong and pink being weaker, but they feel pretty inconsistent in strength. Luckily, they're not too common or found in particularly vexing areas, and are only in this level, but be warned. There's another cutscene when you escape the campus, which warns you of the entertainment complex you're about to infiltrate and party in like it's 1959. Looking at when the background music released, it'd be more accurate to say we're partying like it's the 6th of June to the 18th of July 1997, but we're getting into semantics there. This is another standard platforming level, though I should specify that even if I'm not going in depth on a level, the standard of level design is pretty high throughout, especially when combined with factors we'll get to soon. This level introduces the Eggman soda mechanic, which is the main threat of the whole level pack and makes this the second SRB2 mod I've covered in a row to have soda be a major gimmick. Really, it's just a typical floor hazard, but it's said between this stage and the next, bootlegging. Indeed, the two stages are fairly similar, and as one is about climbing up a tower and the next is about getting back down, they share little bits of level design, even if it then begs the question why you actually do this in universe. It's hardly like any questions granted by the time you reach the top. At this point though, we are reaching the end of the level pack. Another short cutscene is used to introduce the science fair we're about to break into before we, break into it. It's another level you need to find emerald shards in, but it's a little more typical of the adventure series than the first, in that you can find the shards in whatever order you'd like, rather than them acting as effectively progress markers. It's still basically impossible to miss them, it's just that rather than them being nearly impossible not to collect by just running along a single path, they're very obvious due to being found at the top of these rooms. And surprisingly, these rooms stand out a fair amount compared to your usual conference or exhibition halls, although it's still worth running through those to hear the Eggman lackey seethe and mould over the natural superiority of the Hedgehog over Eggman across the intercom. Once we've got all the shards, we have another cutscene where we get to watch an Eggman commercial before he unveils his master plan, before we begin the most famous level of the whole pack, run. I mean, it is a command to be rude not to listen. The most Roger any Roger level has ever Rogered. This is the level you've seen a million times in speedruns and the like. It's a great level, probably the best in the pack, although I think my time is probably less impressive than most. It immediately allows you to enter that sort of zen state that I think the Roger levels are great at drawing out of you, with it being immediately clear where you need to go and there being plenty of gimmicks to help you make sure you can take turns, jumps and corners without breaking your flow. My only problem is purely technical. You might have recognised it in my footage, but every time I played this level I'd get this awkward effect where items would blink in and out of existence as I approached. No idea why this happens, although I'd like to think it's not because of my PC, but it's also clearly not intentional. Luckily, it doesn't affect the level too much, so we can still reach the end, whereupon we have a final cliffhanger for Sol Sestancia Part 2 after a short jungle trek. There are a couple of bonus levels, but the only one I'll bring attention to is Uptown. Love everything about it, whereas the other bonus stages are just a bit boring in comparison. So overall, the level design is at the high quality standard you've come to expect from a Roger pack, although I would say the levels separating the traditional stages are not particularly great. They're serviceable and early ones are pretty good, but I'd say they lose steam pretty significantly as the story progresses. They get smaller and there becomes fewer and fewer things to interact with, especially meaningful and fun things, until they all blend together both with themselves and the cutscene levels, which are supposed to be small and linear. But when they're all ultimately just transitions, that's fine. You'd expect them to blend together once you're in a position where all of the levels they divide are occurring in a fairly small area of one island. Going off of the vague memories of what I can remember of Sonic Adventure Genesis and Angel Island Tour, I'd say the level design neatly slots above the former and below the latter. There's no 2D sections, thank God, but I'd say that flow I'd expect to see from this creator's levels is broken just a tad more often than throughout Angel Island, especially of what I can remember of the first half of that mod. I've ducked and weaved around what the story of Sol Sestancia actually is throughout the previous section, but it's really quite simple. Sol Sestancia is in celebration, and Eggman has somehow been made responsible for catering. Using the shards of the Master Emerald he steals in the prologue stages, he's using soda to mind control the masses in the royal family, effectively making himself the de facto ruler of the island. The story is nice and easy to follow. You start off chasing Eggman to Sol Sestancia. The incompetence of his subordinates causes him to crash in the jungles. You go and find out what's going on while he takes over, and by the time you get back to civilization to the latter half of the stages, you're just trying to escape his all-encompassing grasps. It actually ends at a fairly low point, as by the time credits roll, you still haven't actually begun fighting back, and Eggman's takeover is complete. Although that's because the mod took so long to develop that Roger decided to split the thing in half, rather than let people wait for years to play it. However, I'd hope you can guess from the synopsis that despite the downer ending, this is still mostly a humorous romp across a tropical island. As much as I'm sure there are some people who try and argue with me, there's simply no way for Mad Genius takes over island using modified soda from his catering business to be anything other than slapstick, and while it is more serious than Angel Island Tour, where Gun goes berserk trying to recreate Pepsi after budget cuts require them to produce their own equivalent, or Sonic Adventure Genesis, which is a Terminator parody to try and convince Sega not to diverge from the Adventure formula, it's like one rung above on the ladder. We haven't suddenly gone grimdark or anything, just progressed from Roger's YouTube sketches to LucasArts point-and-click game in terms of seriousness. I would say I preferred those two in terms of narrative, although that's probably because I remember watching Roger sketches as a wee lad and they're closer to that formula. But again, based on my vague memory to those mods, I'd be hard pressed to argue that this isn't the most coherent. There isn't a switch up partway through where the direction of the plot completely changes like Tor. I'm not having to figure out what's going on based on what I can interpret of Knuckles doing a bad Arnie impression through the lenses of extreme spite of what Sonic became after Adventure. It's just a linear slapstick story where you run across a tropical island to stop Eggman. I think it's fun and does a good job at justifying why you end up where you do, but apart from the aforementioned moment where you run up a building just so you can run back down it, I'm interested in seeing how it's wrapped up in part 2. I don't think that anyone will argue that the main draw to Roger's mods is the visual style. Packed with custom textures, over 1600 apparently, there is absolutely nothing like it. Apart from the other Roger mod packs. I'd say it does specifically work really well for this mod though, as the art style is not that far off from the sorts you see back in platformers and RPGs of the late 90s, early noughties, as this pack supposedly takes inspiration from. Sol Sestancia does feel fairly alive and bustling, of course to the extent that an SRB2 mod ever could, and the high saturation and contrast makes everything pop and bring out that tropical feel you'd expect. That being said, the draw is, as always, the number of Easter eggs. This pack, like all of Roger's work, is utterly filled to the brim with them, whether that be Jewel and Tangle from IDW, Sonia and Manic from Sonic Underground, Scratch and Grounder, an entire bonus stage based on adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, Carmelita Fox and Sly Raccoon from Sly Raccoon, Professor Pickle, Chip and Dark Gaia, the huge number of characters from the Archie series, not to mention smaller things like Senmu in the Sega store, or Big appearing somewhere in each level, or Roger himself popping up from time to time. I'm sure there's plenty of other characters I didn't recognise, but the point I'm making is that there is a ridiculous amount of these. But what I like more than that is some of the less in-your-face things. Stuff like Eggman hanging pictures of Sonic's deaths in a gallery on the Egg Fleet, or the memorial wall to various bad eggs. It's just really charming, even if you're the sort who believes that a cameo or Easter egg or reference in a work marks the end of the creative industries as a whole. My only gripe is that I'm not sure Roger understands how soda is made, seeing as you sabotage coffee machines to hinder Eggman's production of it, and you can see it being stored in wine barrels. But who knows, maybe that's another layer of slapstick I'm unable to recognise. However, as much as I enjoyed the aesthetics of the pack, I like the music selection even more. It's zany, it doesn't fit into any one genre. As much as it is mostly taken from other sources, it's at least not just ripping vaguely appropriate Sonic themes. You've got songs from Monkey Ball, from Discworld spin-offs, from electro swing groups, and from Hideki Naganuma doing his best Daft Punk impression. I never have much to talk about when it comes to music, purely because I know nothing about talking about it professionally, but I have even less here because I can't even say it's all one vague genre. It's all completely different from one stage to another. As much as some may not love that, I do. I love it when a game's soundtrack will jump from lo-fi to metal to orchestral to jazz and back depending on the context. I prefer it does that than trying to stick to one genre even where it doesn't really fit. The other area of audio I'd like to mention is the voice acting. Roger's levels are pretty unique compared to a lot of other level packs because they contain voice lines throughout the level, which isn't all that common elsewhere. That being said, the good and bad points surrounding the voice acting is mostly the same as always. The voice acting itself is pretty good, with the majority of the actors matching their characters very well, but it's held back with some highly variable recording quality. Because the voice actors are mostly amateur, some will have studio quality audio, but others will have audio so crackly and filled with reverb that it is pretty difficult to actually tell what they're saying. It's a quirk of the creator, it definitely fits in with the late noughties, early 10s Newground animation vibe that most of their packs have, but I'm not sitting there like, oh boy, crap audio quality, yippee. More damning over flaw is that some of the voice acting is done using AI, which might have been a cool novelty at the time of Sol Sestancia's release, but has only become more controversial of a concept since. I'll leave it at this, it's not great. I won't sit there and pretend I could immediately tell whether or not a line was a human or AI generated, but there were a few I'm fairly confident in labelling as AI, and they have all of the usual flaws. Weird pitching, strange pronunciations of common words, a certain robotic lilt to the voice, that sort of thing. It's not too widespread, or at least I only noticed it rarely, but it leaves a stain that didn't need to be there. Sol Sestancia is a characteristically fantastic set of levels from Roger/Roger van der Weide. The level design still fits into Roger's textbook and is still really fun to play through. The story is a little more coherent than his others, yet is still fun, and the visuals and music are great. That being said, I don't like the use of AI voice acting here and there, especially seeing as most/all of it is side characters you don't need to interact with, or at least the most egregious of it is. It begs the question of why it even needed to be there when the character it's attached to could just be a non-interactive cutout like most others. The extra stuff between levels also loses steam as the story progresses, and for as fun of a level as it is, Run is home to a load of extremely noticeable visual glitching, which isn't great. That all docks points from what was a great experience, though it by no means ruins it unless you are particularly upstanding and moralistic surrounding the use of generative AI. Not a dig, all the more power to you. It might have been an 8 before, but now I'm more comfortable giving it a 7 out of 10. Hopefully part 2 lives up to this, and if it gets rid of the AI voice acting and all of the levels remain at a consistent high quality, surpass it. But for now, I hope you enjoyed the video, and ciao.